Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Entertaining series on the Mr. FPGA DE10 Nano project, more specifically the work-in-progress Sega Saturn core, and today we're taking a look at X-Men, the arcade conversion from the Konami arcade board to the Sega Saturn by Hot Rod X. And I've covered this game twice now on the channel, when it was the 0.1 version of the game and the 0.3 version of the game, but 0.40 is out now, bringing us new characters, more levels, more visual effects, and just overall a much better experience when it comes to converting X-Men from the arcade board to the Sega Saturn. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But as I said in previous videos, X-Men the arcade beat 'em up is one of the best beat 'em ups ever made. Konami in the 90s was on an absolute hot streak when it came to beat 'em up games, and now we have the fourth stage as well as boss in the game. But let's move back a little bit to the beginning because Dazzler is now a playable character in the 0.40 build, and she was not available beforehand. So Hot Rod X basically comes in, adds new characters, adds new stages, and gives you more of the game to experience on Sega Saturn today. But I would say the best improvement isn't just that extra level and extra character. A lot of the fire effects and other visual effects have either been changed, enhanced, or added in. And when you download the files for this mod, you're going to find a README file inside of that folder, which is going to go over every single change added into the game because they are quite numerous, and I wouldn't be able to cover every single one of them in a single video. But I would say that the game's performance is better, the visuals are better, and overall this is starting to feel like the de facto way to play the X-Men arcade game. And even though we obviously have it on the Mr. FPGA side of things as an arcade core now from Hotego and his team, Hot Rod X bringing this over to the Sega Saturn is absolutely spectacular. All of those fire effects in the background layer, all of the sprites, everything here just looks amazing on the Sega Saturn graphic hardware. And this isn't just something that is basically being emulated on Saturn, it is a full code port bringing over everything from the game and just rebuilding it from scratch. I would say it definitely feels a little bit more difficult than the arcade version on normal, but that is a ton of fun, and you get 5 credits per playable character, so I definitely had to scum into the second character with a second controller on my Mr. FPGA to be able to get to the end of stage 4, but it hasn't been recently since I played X-Men, and honestly it is one of those Konami games. It is a bit thirsty for quarters, and that definitely adheres here. But as far as all the mechanics are concerned, all of the hit detection, everything here is as good as it was in the arcade original. So much so that even on some of the bosses you can cheese them and beat them the same way you would in the arcade board, basically making them free fights. And I would say I'm not the greatest Dazzler player here, definitely not a character I would ever pick if I was actually playing the game in arcades or on Mr. FPGA, but she is a new addition to this build of the game, so it felt really important to at least cover a little bit of that. But again, just take a look at the screen here and see how well the graphics translate over to Sega Saturn. Honestly, in the last couple of builds, there's been a glitch here and there in the sprites or background layer or effects, but here I can see absolutely nothing in the overall image that makes me think this is anything other than a game that was released by Konami for the Sega Saturn back in the 90s. And that is the highest praise I can give to a project like this. If I can't tell that it wasn't made by a team of developers on the SDK and hardware back in the 90s, then you know it's doing a really good job. And that's exactly what the X-Men port is. Basically feels like a professional developed game from a manufacturing house back in the day, except as 2024 we're playing it on Mr. FPGA. And do be aware that you can play this on real Sega Saturn hardware. I loaded up in BenDefend to make sure it worked. You can play this any way you want, and you definitely should check it out. And I would say that this version seems to have a few more characters on screen than the arcade original. I love that I ran out of credits and had to wait for that elevator to scroll all the way up to the top before it gave me the game over. But let's move over to another character here, someone I would more likely play as. And you'll see here again, the bosses look great in this port as well. This is just a total ton of fun, and I know sometimes people ask in the comments, why do people spend the effort to bring games to the Sega Saturn or PlayStation or Nintendo 64 that already exist on other platforms? And the answer really is, because why not? Somebody loves the Sega Saturn, they want to talk about it, and they want to make more games for it, so we get ports like X-Men from the arcade board to the Saturn, and that is just absolutely amazing. And I would say the soundtrack brought over to the Saturn hardware sounds great as well. Not only is that one of the best soundtracks Konami ever made for an arcade beat 'em up, but it sounds amazing coming out of the Saturn hardware, and that is going to be different than the arcade original PCB, so the conversion process definitely has done it a lot of favors. It sounds absolutely amazing, and I love these Gator characters here in their full boots and onesie outfits. Really makes you wonder what's going on under those. Apparently Gators in this world wear clothing for modesty. But even the mud monsters here, whatever they're called, again, not a huge Marvel fan outside of the game, so I don't know. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me if you know. Look incredible on the Saturn hardware with that sprite scaling. It is just a look that 100% works. All of the colorways, all of the palette, everything else have come over so effectively well to Sega Saturn. It really is a fun time to see all of those modifications running in real time, making this game just ever so slightly better than the arcade original. If this was ported back in the day, people would probably say it was every bit as good as the arcade board, because a lot of times when you got home ports of arcade games, they could be inferior to what you actually played in the arcades, but in this instance in 2024, it's every bit as good as the arcade, and probably slightly better. And that really makes me wonder how far Hot Rod X is going to take this concept. Is he going to bring over more arcade boards from Konami onto the Sega Saturn? I'd love to see stuff like Bucky O'Hare or Metamorphic Force come over, but you tell me down below. If you could snap your fingers and make one Konami 2D arcade game instantaneously appear on Sega Saturn, which one would it be? For me, I think it would probably be Metamorphic Force. That game was just so weird and quirky. I want to have a lot more people play it. But Konami had a metric crap ton of amazing games back in the day, and a ton of them didn't really ever get home ports. Sure, there are some modern re-releases on online stores, but the arcade originals are still pretty hard to come by, and these Mudmen here just absolutely destroyed me. This is the type of game, whether you're on the arcade board or on the Sega Saturn port, where you can absolutely get juggled and beat to hell, so you want to pay attention to that. Try not to get your back to any of the playable characters, or else you're definitely going to get punished. But I would say all of the bosses, their sprites, their animations have come over very nicely as well. That's the great thing about this port. If you just didn't pay too much attention and didn't realize we have a 3-player setup versus the 2, 4, or 6 you'd have in arcades, you really would probably have no idea this wasn't running on the arcade hardware unless you played this game a metric crap ton and remembered what it looked like, because some of the visual effects are slightly more impressive again than you would see on the arcade board, at least in my opinion. And it is a proper beat 'em up game because it has an elevator, and if you don't watch my channel and don't know, it's not a real beat 'em up if there isn't at least one elevator we can fight on in the game. And the stage you're seeing right now is completely new on this build. Before, when you beat the boss for stage 3, the demo would end, it would say stop back soon for more content. So everything on stage 4 is brand new to the build, and it's every bit as good as everything that's come before it. You see that some of the enemies are going to have a slightly different coloring here, denoting they're slightly more powerful, and that which is a thing that Konami and many other arcade manufacturers did in the day to reuse sprites. They recolored them, showed you that they were more powerful, but basically still reused the same assets. I'm going to give you one more soundtrack sample in just a moment, because the stage has some particular good music, and I really love how it sounds coming out of the Sega Saturn hardware, especially on Mr. FPGA. So 30 seconds and I'll be back and show you how the current demo ends. But enjoy! Just sounds absolutely incredible, and do remember that pretty much every arcade game in the 90s, especially 2D beat-em-ups, could be cheesed. This boss character here, if you jump over the fire attack and do one of the diving kicks, you can just juggle him in the corner for the entire time, but you do need to be against the right hand side of the screen. I tried it on the left hand side and I wasn't able to make it work because he does drop back a bit. And you'll see there I did drop that input, just didn't do it correctly. Wasn't Mr. FPGA's fault, just didn't get my timing right, and that screws up the juggle. And honestly, it's not the most exciting way to play a game or beat a boss, but it's talking about the fact that the code adheres so well to the arcade version of the game that you can kind of use the same cheese strats if you're just trying to beat a boss that you don't want to go one-on-one with, because this game definitely can be cheap. The boss will absolutely stagger you and take a life away just because Konami wanted those quarters back in the day. But now we're not actually spending quarters, we're just hitting start on credits that are in the machine, so we don't have to worry about spending money. So cheesing it a little bit, definitely nothing I'm going to judge you for. But if you haven't checked this thing out yet, I will leave a link to Hot Rod X's Twitter page down below where you can find the files, because trust me, even if you played this game a dozen times before, playing it a 13th time on the Sega Saturn is a metric ton of fun. But the boss is dead, the demo is over, we'll see you next time. Bye bye.